Making headlines for this week of June 24th. CU EU. British voters snub noses to Eurocrats and send a message that their control is neither desired nor wanted. Euro paradox. NATO attempts to flex muscles at Russia while allies signal desires to end sanctions. Black Brexit Friday. UK and global markets react strongly, but is collapse vote-related or just an excuse? And green cremation. Relatively new technology dissolves body organically without flames and without harm to nature.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all. Now, it would seem, the confusion in the EU is really about to get underway, and what happens from this moment forward will depend upon just how informed the people of the UK and of Europe really are with regard to their enslavement to an unelected corporate entity power body seeking to impose commercial rules upon nation-states without the informed and democratic consent of its peoples. The word is spreading rapidly. UK has voted to Brexit. The BBC reported on the 24th the final result as being 48.1% voting to remain within the EU and 51.9% voting to leave the Union. An RT article summarizing some of the key events following the vote offers a reasonable summary of what is taking place. The following points were reported as having occurred on June 24th, the day after the vote. The UK government should put the referendum results into effect as soon as possible, France's President François Hollande believes, according to a French government spokesman, Stéphane Le Foll. A strategy paper from the German Finance Ministry has recommended the UK become an associate partner country of the EU. RT's Ed Schultz believes Brexit has been a political defeat for U.S. President Barack Obama and his plans to sign the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership trade deal. Earlier this year, the president made a controversial intervention in the EU referendum campaign, which caused some resentment among Leave campaigners. Schultz was quoted as saying that obviously President Obama and his administration wanted to see the UK stay in the EU for the issue of trade agreements, trying to get TTIP and trying to get the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, passed. French far-right leader Marine Le Pen held a press conference in Paris in which she called for France to hold a similar referendum on EU membership. European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker has rebuffed claims that Brexit could mean the beginning of the end of the EU. Juncker was pressed to comment on this question at a press conference, and he offered a straightforward no and then quickly exiting. There are what appear to be either confusing or conflicting messages regarding the outcome of this vote. While Juncker claims the EU is strong and will continue to be strong, RT and several other sources are beginning to write that other countries are now wanting to begin exercising their own referendum votes. Other countries rumored to now be considering a possible exit from the Union include Austria, Italy, France, Germany, Sweden, the Netherlands, Czech Republic, and Hungary. This does not suggest that the governments are necessarily calling for this, but there are increased demands being made by the public to be given their own chance to vote on the subject of staying within the Union. A lot of fear-mongering was going on as the desperate supporters of staying within the EU began to face the real possibility that the country may just vote to separate from the Union. The Southend News Network, in an article on June 21st, had reported that David Cameron has announced this morning that Britain will remain in the EU after Thursday's referendum, even if the British people vote in favour of leaving. According to the Prime Minister, his position in charge of the country means that he can pretty much do whatever he wants anyway, no matter how much Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, and Michael Gove try to say otherwise. What has also been reported by Stephen Lensman on the Global Research website on June 23rd is that all the fuss and bother about Brexit largely ignores its non-binding status. Parliament, not voters, are deciding if Britain stays or leaves the EU, the latter extremely unlikely. Writing in the Financial Times, British lawyer David Alan Green explained Brexit voting is advisory and not mandatory, with Parliament having the final say. MPs can legally disregard the public's will either way. They alone are empowered to decide the path Britain chooses. What happens ahead is a matter of politics, not law. It will come down to what is politically expedient and practical, said Green. If, however, it is true that the UK will remain in the EU regardless, and if it is true that any referendum is non-binding, then there would have to be other reasons going on for why Cameron offered his resignation as Prime Minister on the 24th. What these two articles are basically saying is that any vote by the public is only deemed valid if the vote elects members to act as politicians, but is not binding when the same people challenge any commercial legislation or decision made without their informed and democratic consent. Nick Visser, writing for the Huffington Post on June 24th, reported on Cameron's resignation, writing that Cameron announced he would resign his post on Friday morning after his country voted to leave the Union, adding political leadership to the United Kingdom's growing list of uncertainties. Cameron promised to stay in office until October and help steady the ship before a new leader is chosen. On questions about the arrangements for how we are governed, there are times when we should ask the people themselves, the Conservative Party leader said outside the Prime Ministerial residence at 10 Downing Street. The British people have asked to leave. Their will must be respected. Thursday's referendum badly weakened Cameron and means Britain will be the first country to withdraw from the 28-member group. Now the decision has been made to leave. We need to find the best way, an emotional Cameron said. I will do everything I can to help. I love this country and I feel honored to have served it. I will do anything I can in the future to help this great country succeed. Visser added that Cameron had pledged before the vote to stay in office, whatever the results. He had considered stepping down if 2014's independence referendum in Scotland was successful, but the Scottish people ultimately decided to remain in the UK, and on that vote there is still suspicion as to whether or not that vote was rigged. There were fear-mongered messages that a Brexit would be harmful to the UK economy and to the currency. More on the financial consequences will come up in financial news. However, a London Telegraph article by Matthew Holhouse on June 23rd wrote the following. Voters in France, Italy, and the Netherlands are demanding their own votes on European Union membership and the euro, as the continent faces a contagion of referenda. EU leaders fear a string of copycat polls could tear the organization apart, as leaders come under pressure to emulate David Cameron and hold votes. It came as German business leaders handed a considerable boost to the Leave campaign by saying it would be very, very foolish to deny the UK a free trade deal after Brexit. Marcus Kerber, the head of the BDI, which represents German industry, said that trade barriers that were emulated in the 1970s, that style, would result in job losses in Germany. Imposing trade barriers, imposing protectionist measures between our two countries or between the two political centers, the European Union on the one hand and the UK on the other, would be a very foolish thing in the 21st century. What essentially is being said here is that the head of German industry admitted that a Brexit would not be a reason to stop trade with the UK, and his admission would add fuel to the fires in other countries to also leave the Union if they know that they will not be punished on trade. Even back on May 20th, far-right French leader Marine Le Pen was quoted on RT as saying, "I believe that the European Union is in the process of collapsing on itself for one simple reason. The two pillars on which it was founded, the Schengen Agreement, allowing free travel between membership countries, and the euro, are in the process of crumbling," Le Pen told Marie Dudouet of RT France in an exclusive interview. So they're in a sort of mad downward spiral in which they're capable of anything today to try to keep the building standing. Rebecca Perring, writing for the London Express on June 24th, reported that French President François Hollande has called an emergency meeting following Britain's decision to leave, and calls for a Frexit have heightened. Le Pen was also mentioned as having repeated her calls for the same referendum in France. Although there is still a lot happening, and developments will certainly be ongoing after this newscast, two questions that many are beginning to ask are what happens next, and how will this be accomplished? The Treaty of Lisbon amends the EU's two core treaties, the Treaty on the European Union and the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. According to the website lisbontreaty.org, it is Article 50 that will govern the procedure for an exit from the Union. There are 5 criteria for Article 50, the first 2 of which are as follows. Any member state may decide to withdraw from the Union in accordance with its own constitutional requirements, and a member state which decides to withdraw shall notify the European Council of its intention. In the light of the guidelines provided by the European Council, the Union shall negotiate and conclude an agreement with that state, setting out the arrangements for its withdrawal, taking account of the framework for its future relationship with the Union. That agreement shall be negotiated in accordance with Article 218, subsection 3 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. It shall be concluded on behalf of the Union by the Council, acting by a qualified majority after obtaining the consent of the European Parliament. An article on June 24th on theweek.co.uk news website noted that concerning Article 50, it sets out the rules, processes, and deadlines that would govern an exit from the EU and is the only legal way to leave the Union, although it has never before been used and is completely untested. The cabal has used commercial law to make getting out from under their control very difficult. However, as I hinted at the beginning of the newscast, things also start to get a bit tricky because one has to keep in mind that the global cabal did not get to its point of global domination in the past without considering all the possible options of what could happen. Although there are changes taking place on levels that were not happening before, the global cabal is desperately trying to make its old formula work within a new planetary and human consciousness that is continually breaking it down. Carolyn Harvey, writing for thecanary.co on June 21st, reports on a presentation given by Professor Michael Dugan on the EU referendum. Dugan highlights the point I just made in a 20-minute YouTube speech that will be included in the show summary. The article writes the following. Dugan looks at the confusion over what sovereignty the UK has within Europe, which has been an issue wildly distorted in the campaign. What Dugan ultimately addresses is that while the UK is a sovereign state under international law, and although it is the supreme lawmaking authority in the land, there are concessions that are required when being a part of another international treaty or group, such as the UN, NATO, and also the EU. Harvey writes, due to the UK's integral and incredibly powerful involvement with the EU since it joined in 1973, our laws are inextricably linked with those of the Union. As a result, Dugan notes that in the event of a Brexit, there will have to be a comprehensive review of the UK legal system. This will be an enormous technical undertaking. Dugan says that this could be a point of concern, and this is why the people will have to be very vigilant. Dugan suggests that if Brexit happens, the Conservative government will likely be handed the power to completely rewrite UK law and policy. This would mean that in pursuit of our quote-unquote sovereignty, we could in effect become a one-party state. Assuming this was true, one might have to wonder then why Cameron resigned, so there must be something else going on. Katie Mansfield, writing for the London Express on June 18th, reported on a scathing comments made by former President of Poland, Lech Wałęsa. In the article, he is quoted as saying that the EU is falling apart because it has no shared values. Europe, this European construction, has no foundation. We rejected Christianity, we rejected ideologies like communism, and now there's nothing left. What can we expect from societies when each of them has different foundations? I'm rather more in favor of repairing what we have already. What's the use of starting all over again? But we need to do it. Repair the EU in a more efficient and transparent way. We have to explain things better to people. They need to understand what we're doing and why it exists. What we've got now is mistrust, suspicions, bureaucracy, dissatisfaction, and trickery because we don't have any solid foundations. The question that many may now start looking at is it possible that the people have also been tricked with a vote to leave? Keep in mind that one is only considered to be tricked if one is uninformed. As long as the people are informed as to what has happened, other choices can then be made. Paul Mason, in an article appearing on The Guardian on June 20th, offers a sober comparison between a real revolt and a fake one. He writes, "The crucial difference between a real revolt and a fake one is that the elite does not usually lead the real ones. In a real revolt, the rich and powerful usually head for the hills, terrified." In his article, Mason was making a final appeal to help convince people to stay in the EU, but there is this point of his that has an element of truth to it. Why are the elitists not exactly running to the hills in fear if this is a true revolt? Carrie Ann Mendoza, writing for The Canary on June 21st, seems to feel that the referendum is a cruel trick on the people. She writes, "The referendum is not about our fate in the EU, or controlling our borders, or protecting our sovereignty as a nation, or enhancing our democracy. It is, as is almost everything in modern politics, about wealth and power." If the EU referendum was a genuine debate about the future of our nation, it would look very different. First, and most importantly, there would be a general election set shortly afterwards. There may even be leadership elections set for the major political parties as well. This would mean that voters could not only choose whether to leave or remain in the EU, but how they would leave or remain in the EU. Each party, and indeed factions within each, would have to set out a clear vision on whether to leave or remain in the EU and what each of those choices would look like under their leadership. Referendum voters would know that after the vote, they could then elect to government the people they felt most confident who could deliver that future. With Cameron's resignation and an impending election later this year, it might seem that Mendoza was not quite on the button because maybe, if the people are alert and strong, they can demand that the parties represent their best options for an exit and be allowed to vote on them. The more awakened and informed one becomes, the more challenging it also becomes to truly look at a story such as this and be able to begin observing the story, almost from a distance, to see what possible agendas may be at play and who stands to benefit from each consequence. In other geopolitical news, another question sitting just slightly in the background now behind the Brexit result is the overall situation in Europe and how this could impact NATO and the Western allegations concerning Russia. Putin was asked at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum last week about a possible Brexit vote. A Sputnik News article reported on June 17th that, according to Putin, Russia prefers to have a strong Europe to cooperate with, as such a partner is less likely to be manipulated by outside forces. Putin was also quoted as saying that, "You want me to say what Russia's position is on this, whether Russia wants to talk to a strong Europe or a weak one. Russia certainly wants to talk with a strong Europe, because having dialogue with a weak partner is not worth it. Where one partner is weak, one can always expect that someone else will somehow pressure the weak one, and all agreements and joint plans will be ruined. A strong partner will never allow something like that to be done. I think that we should respect the choice of the British people, regardless of what it will be." One has to pay very close attention to an issue and then try to discern who is saying what and why that individual or that country might be saying it. Germany has tried to show publicly that it supports a strong and united Europe, and yet in the background, the people are becoming just as upset, and business leaders are wanting to pull back the Russian sanctions because it is affecting their businesses. And Germany in general seems to be moving towards the Eastern Trading Bloc, while joining the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and apparently seeking to participate more in the new Silk Road. NATO, however, led by the US, continues to try to exert its muscle and its continued control over European countries in an attempt to justify its existence. Sputnik News reported on June 11th that NATO has begun its largest war game since the end of the Cold War era in Poland, involving 31,000 troops from 24 countries. The United States has provided 14,000 soldiers for Anaconda 2016 this year. The move is aimed at demonstrating NATO's military might and readiness to Moscow. Michael Curtis of the American Thinker echoes Wagaman by writing that, "Is the Russian buildup a danger to the security of the NATO countries and to the U.S.? The U.S. pays a disproportionate amount for NATO arrangements in money and manpower. The U.S. spends $600 billion on defense, while Russia spends only $84 billion by comparison. The U.S. has 19 aircraft carriers to Russia's 1, Curtis notes. The U.S. needs some kind of imminent threat to justify its defense spending, and to justify its continued need to ask for more, especially considering that the main reasons for NATO in the first place were to stop the now collapsed USSR and also to stop the now collapsed Warsaw Pact." An RT article on June 18th wrote the following: "Sharply criticizing NATO war games in Eastern Europe, German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier told Bild am Sonntag newspaper that inflaming the standoff with Russia would endanger European security and increase risk of reviving an old confrontation. Speaking recently just ahead of the upcoming NATO summit in Warsaw on July 8th, Steinmeier was quoted as saying that whoever believes that a symbolic tank parade on the alliance's eastern border will bring security is mistaken. We are well advised to not create pretexts to renew an old confrontation." CVN reported last week that relations between Poland and the EU may be starting to get a bit tense, as the country is being seen in a less favorable manner because the country is trying to get control of its Supreme Court, a move that has been frowned upon by EU commissioners. The NATO summit in this country may be seen as a way to get powerful people into the country under a different reason, to exert some polite pressure on the leadership of the country. A Times of India article reported a little bit more information, writing that NATO had announced on Monday that it would deploy 4 battalions to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland to counter a more assertive Russia, ahead of the landmark summit in Warsaw next month. All four countries were once ruled from Moscow and remain deeply suspicious of Russian intentions, especially after Russia's annexation of Crimea from Ukraine in 2014, an annexation which was actually a democratic vote by the people to separate from Ukraine. In an interview with Bild on Thursday, NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg said Russia is seeking to create a zone of influence through military means. We are observing massive militarization at NATO borders, in the Arctic, in the Baltic, from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean Sea, he told the newspaper, while also stressing that NATO is not seeking a conflict with Russia. But all of this appears to be hot air, fear, and warmongering. Germany seems to disagree with the assessment of NATO. In an RT article on June 19th, it was reported that Germany should work to mend relations with Russia rather than taunt it by placing troops in Eastern Europe near its borders, especially in light of Germany's history as Russia's invader, former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder said in a recent news interview. The article adds that speaking to Süddeutsche Zeitung, Schröder, who served as Germany's head from 1998 to 2005, warned NATO that its policies could lead to a new arms race with Russia, saying that the sanctions will neither reduce conflict nor will they restore good relations. The former chancellor ridiculed the idea that Russia may be nurturing a plan to invade NATO countries, stressing that the notion is completely out of touch with the real state of affairs. Schröder believes that anti-Russian sanctions have proven ineffective and praised the steps taken by Germany's foreign minister, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who has been calling to gradually lift them. He is not alone in this view, as several other countries, including France and Italy, have recently suggested that the restrictions on Russia should be at least partially cancelled, as they have backfired and injured the EU's economy. It would seem other countries are beginning to agree, as they see the increasing futility in continuing sanctions that only hurt themselves while under orders from the US, a country that does not suffer economically from those same sanctions. Russian President Putin has also responded to the NATO fear-mongering. An RT article on 18th of June from the Economic Summit in St. Petersburg writes that Putin used a keynote address in his home city of St. Petersburg this weekend to outline his belief that America uses NATO to drive a wedge between the EU and Russia. Instead, he offered an alternative vision for European unity. Jean-Claude Juncker has a dream. The European Union Commission President can see a future where a common European home stretches from the Atlantic Ocean to its Pacific counterpart. This weekend, he told the St. Petersburg Forum that for the European Union and Russia, the prize one day could be great, a vast region governed by the rule of law, trading freely and working together on common projects. In 2010, Putin had a similar mental picture, and he took to the pages of Germany's Süddeutsche Zeitung to announce it. We propose the creation of a harmonious economic community stretching from Lisbon to Vladivostok, Putin suggested. In the future, we could even consider a free trade zone or even more advanced forms of economic integration. The result would be a unified continental market with a capacity worth trillions of euros. From a European perspective, they have much in common with Russians, including religion and their sensibility and general outlook. The article notes, however, that if you are perched in Washington, all of this is your worst nightmare. Make no mistake, there is one thing the U.S. establishment fears more than anything else, and that is any form of alliance between what it perceives as German-led Europe and Russian-dominated Eurasia. So much so that its primary foreign policy focus since the collapse of the Soviet Union has been to prevent this partnership. Particularly since 2003, when France, Germany, and Russia joined forces to oppose America's illegal invasion of Iraq, that moment which united continental Europe's three main powers against U.S. interests, concentrated a lot of minds. Strat 4, a company often considered to be the shadow CIA, sponsored the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, believed to be in 2015, although this is unconfirmed. In this YouTube video, observe a few selected comments from the question and answer session given by an unknown Strat 4 spokesperson on the fears of the U.S. and its sphere of influence.
The primordial interest of the United States, over which for a century we have fought wars, the First, Second Cold War, has been the relationship between Germany and Russia, because united they are the only force that could threaten us, and to make sure that that doesn't happen. If you're a Ukrainian, is essentially reach out to the only country that will help you, which is the United States. 10 days ago, General Hodges, Commander U.S. Army Europe, visited Ukraine. He announced that U.S. trainers would now officially be coming. He actually pinned medals on Ukrainian fighters, which by protocol of the military is not the way. Foreigners don't get to pin on, medals. But he did, showing that this was his army. He then left and in the Baltics announced that the United States would be pre-positioning armor, artillery, and other equipment in the Baltics, Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria, which is a very interesting point. So the United States, and now yesterday the United States announced that it would be sending weapons. Tonight, of course, they denied it, but they are. The weapons will go. In all of this, the United States has acted outside the context of NATO, because NATO has to have a 100% vote. Any one country can veto anything, and the Turks will veto it just for giggles. The point is that the United States is prepared to create a cordon sanitaire around Russia. Russia knows it. Russia believes that the United States intends to break the Russian Federation. I think that, as Peter Lorre put it, we don't want to kill you, we just want to hurt you a little bit. Either way, we are back at the old game. And if you go ask a Pole or a Hungarian or a Romanian, they live in a totally different universe from a German. And they live in a totally different universe from a Spaniard. So there is no commonality in Europe. But if I were a Ukrainian, I would do exactly what they're doing. Try to draw the Americans in.
The article also hints that the U.S. used Ukraine to justify NATO's existence. The article writes that Putin believes that America milked the 2013-2014 Kiev Maidan turmoil to justify NATO's existence. Why did they need to support the coup in Ukraine? This is a complicated internal political situation there, and the opposition that is in power today would have most likely come to power by democratic means through elections. As well, the Russian president thinks that Washington exploited the delicate Ukrainian ethnic balance to place Russia in an impossible situation. They need an external enemy, an external opponent, or why else would this organization be needed, he insisted, referring to NATO. Continuing his theme, Putin went on to outline how he believes Washington is manipulating its European partners. The president contended that through anti-Russia sanctions, the U.S. has pushed the EU into a trade war that is costing Europe billions in lost trade while leaving the U.S. unscathed. They're not bothered at all about these sanctions because they don't feel any impact at all from our counter-sanctions, Putin said. In Europe, they feel the impact, but the U.S. does not feel any impact. There's no effect. The Americans tell their partners that they need to be patient. Why should they be patient? I don't understand, said Putin. Nevertheless, Putin acknowledged that America remains the world's most powerful country. America is a great power, probably the sole superpower today. We accept that. But when it comes to the U.S. projecting that power, he shot back, the world needs a strong country like the U.S., but we don't need it constantly interfering in our affairs, telling us how to live, and interfering in Europe's attempts to strengthen ties with us. It is perhaps a bit easier to understand that Europe has more in common with Russia than they do with the U.S. at this point, and it would also be understandable why the U.S. would be so desperate to keep tensions in place between Europe and Russia. What remains to be seen is how the geopolitical and geoeconomic pieces fall into place after this Brexit vote, and what it may or may not mean for Europe, Russia, the US, but ultimately the people of our world. In Italy, the voice of the people there are starting to make it clear that they too are fed up with the status quo and with the controls placed on them by an external, unelected, controlling entity. The Matthew Holhouse article mentioned in the lead story also noted the following. In Italy, the anti-establishment Five Star Movement on Tuesday declared that it would demand a referendum on the euro. The party wants the euro to be split, one for the rich north and one for the south. Beppe Grillo, the party's leader, has called for a full referendum on EU membership, he said. The mere fact that a country like Great Britain is holding a referendum on whether to leave the EU signals the failure of the European Union. Five Star won 19 out of 20 mayoral elections on Sunday, including in Rome and Turin, in a major blow to Matteo Renzi, the Prime Minister. RT has more in this report.
The anti-establishment Five Star Movement has dealt Italy's ruling coalition a bloody nose after winning the mayoral race in Rome. 37-year-old lawyer Virginia Raggi has become the first female mayor in the city's long history. Her landslide victory is seen as a huge shift in Italian politics and a massive blow to Prime Minister Matteo Renzi's government.
It's a fundamental historic moment. It marks a turning point. It's beyond expectations. We took Rome and 12 municipalities. We have won in Turin and in several Italian districts.
The Five Star Movement, represented by Raggi, was founded just 7 years ago and has quickly grown to become Italy's second largest party, while according to recent polls, its Eurosceptic policies have propelled it to the top of the charts in the national popularity stakes. The movement has also pledged to fight government corruption and cronyism. Five Star has picked up both left and right-wing supporters. It was set up by Italian comedian and actor Beppe Grillo, but it's widely thought he's now taking a backseat role in favour of Raggi.
The economy is down, shops and malls closed, towns are dying. Now they keep telling us, you are to blame, you didn't live within your means, and you are not paying taxes. But I want to know what happens to my taxes. Why should I pay them if I don't get the services the government must provide? The state has distanced itself. It's only a police force to support violent rallies. There's no state that would commend you for your hard work. I want to change it. First we need reform. We need to start from scratch to reinvent the Italian and European culture. Who are we? We've lost the idea of who we are and what we're going to do in the future. We must think about it right now. We must think of the type of energy that we need, goods that we'll produce, and so on. We must start right now, otherwise we will be governed by fools and idiots who will drag us down the cliff.
We heard from political analyst Lorenzo Zamponi. He says Raggi's historic victory means the Five Star Movement now has a real chance in the next general election.
It is a historical defeat. Well, it is the first misstep, in some way, a midterm exam for Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, and I think it could lead to the fact that in the next general election in 2018, the Five Star Movement will be a serious contender also for the national majority in the parliament. It will show a point of weakness in Renzi's narrative, in Renzi's trajectory, and definitely all of his opponents inside and outside the party will have the chance to attack him in the referendum. It will be more a referendum on him than a referendum on the constitutional reform.
Across Europe, there's been a rise in support for parties that are challenging the political establishment.
Whether Italy's new mayors will be able to unite and remove the corruption in politics, banking and the legal systems remain to be seen, although it could be hoped that they may observe what happened in Iceland and seek to arrest bankers and politicians if it will serve the people and the country. Spain is also setting its sights on stopping the political and bureaucratic elites. TelesurTV.net reported on June 23rd that two left-oriented parties, or in fact several left-oriented parties, will be uniting for a similar vision. The coalition is being called Unidos Podemos, or United We Can. The new party consists of Podemos, Equo, United Left, and other left-leaning parties. The union has been applauded by leftists across Spain and also Europe. The platform is calling for social and anti-austerity reforms. The party is currently polling in second place, and if victorious in the upcoming election, they will displace the long-established Socialist Party. This election is expected to take place on June 26th, after months of talks that have failed to produce a new Prime Minister. Given the result in the UK, the outcome is expected to empower more people in that country to vote for significant and also a united alternative. In a quick note in France, following the ongoing protests there, Henry Samuel, writing for the London Telegraph on June 21st, has reported that France's main police union on Tuesday pleaded with workers to put off a national day of demonstrations on Thursday against a controversial labor law, saying they are too exhausted to cope with protests on top of dealing with the Euro Cup and terror threats. The plea came as workers' unions opposed to the labor law categorically rejected government demands that any demonstration on Thursday in Paris must be static after previous marches through the French capital ended in violent standoffs with police and vandalism. The police have found themselves stuck in the middle between the government and the hardline unions and their allies, and according to the article, they are in desperate need of rest. The labor legislation being protested will be put to a vote in the French Senate on June 29th before a final vote in the National Assembly on July the 5th. Shifting briefly to Brazil for a moment, and there appear to be reports surfacing now that the recently installed government that took over after the coup on former President Dilma Rousseff may itself be getting its day of reckoning. It is being reported by TelesurTV.net on June 15th that Eduardo Cunha, a main mover of the parliamentary coup against Dilma Rousseff, threatened on Wednesday to bring down 150 parliamentarians, a minister and a senator close to Brazil's interim president, Michel Temer, with him if he is expelled from the lower house. Cunha reportedly told Temer's staff that if I'm condemned by your peers or if the Supreme Federal Tribunal sentences me to prison, I will not go down alone. The Council of Ethics of the Chamber of Deputies, which Cunha once led, voted 11-9 on Tuesday to suspend the lawmaker and ban him for 8 years from elected office for lying about his undeclared Swiss bank accounts. Cunha was already suspended by the country's Supreme Court over allegations he was using his position to obstruct an investigation into possible improprieties. The article continued, noting that Tuesday's vote was regarding an alleged US $5 million in bribes hidden away in a Swiss bank account. Cunha denied having money offshore, but accounts tied to him were repeatedly confirmed by Swiss officials. Then, 2 days later, Iran's Press TV reported on the 17th that another Brazilian minister has resigned from the government of interim President Michel Temer less than a month after assuming office, concerning fraud charges. Tourism Minister Henrique Alves resigned on Thursday, becoming the third minister to leave the interim government since mid-May, when it took over from the government of Rousseff. Alves announced his resignation after being named in a plea bargain testimony by Sergio Machado, a former chief executive at the state-run Petrobras oil company, which is the subject of a probe into alleged massive corruption. This article added that Rousseff has condemned the impeachment drive as a coup, pledging to fight on during her trial. The resignation of the tourism minister is now likely to boost Rousseff, who has been arguing all along the way that Temer and others calling for her impeachment are themselves corrupt. Former Transparency Minister Fabiano Silveira and former Planning Minister Romero Jucá previously resigned over alleged links to the Petrobras scandal. The resignation of the tourism minister now comes less than 2 months before Brazil is to host the Olympics. While corruption fighting continues in Brazil, chaos appears to be breaking out in Mexico, but in Colombia, an historic peace deal has been reached, ending more than 50 years of armed conflict between the government and the formerly rebel group known as FARC. An article from Telesur TV reported on June 24th that Colombian social movements issued a wave of support Friday following the signing of the bilateral ceasefire agreement in Havana, Cuba, between President Juan Manuel Santos and the Armed Revolutionary Forces of Colombia, or FARC. The article continues, Omar Fernandez from the Coalition Movement of Social Organizations of Colombia issued similar sentiments, stating that it is a tremendous accomplishment that all Colombians should appreciate. It represents an essential step forward toward peace and true democracy. Continuing, Fernandez emphasized the importance of expanding alternative media outlets in the country in order to facilitate the peace process, blaming mainstream media outlets for their role in generating public support for initiatives contrary to peace efforts. FARC officials and the Colombian government have not yet agreed on terms for the overall implementation of a peace accord and how a national referendum on the deal will be organized. Some issues still to be finalized, as the article indicated, include FARC's reincorporation into civilian life, the transformation of FARC into a political movement, and the monitoring and implementation mechanisms for all commitments. The final peace accord, which must be confirmed by popular vote, is awaiting approval from the country's constitutional court. Putting the peace deal to a popular referendum is not a constitutional or legal obligation of President Santos's administration because the nation's charter gives him the power to negotiate and sign the agreement without that step. However, the Colombian leader has insisted that he wants the nation's people to have the final say. A local poll on the peace treaty has indicated a high degree of support for the process at 61%. In financial news, continuing with the events and fallout coming from the Brexit vote, we turn now to some of the financial implications. While UK Independence Party leader Nigel Farage was overjoyed at the result, the UK currency and markets, as well as many Western markets, were reacting negatively. What are some sources reporting at this time? Canada's Business News Network appears to be selling the message that the vote is a lose-lose scenario, which might be expected as this network caters to the banking elites of Canada. Euronews, in an article by Chris Cummins on June 24th, called the day Black Brexit Friday and reported that the vote caused alarm in the financial community, with London bankers claiming it was the most volatile trading they have ever seen. The banks had to take some big hits. Barclays and RBS both lost around 30%, but later recovered to around a 17% loss. RT was reporting that Japan had apparently put a stop on the trading of the UK currency and UK stocks. According to the article, Asian stock markets are already being routed as traders watch the events unfold in the UK. Japan's Nikkei index slumped by 7%, a loss of over 1,100 points. This is the market's worst one-day fall since March of 2011, when Fukushima was hit by a devastating earthquake that triggered a tsunami and nuclear disaster. The article also reported Standard & Poor's as confirming the UK is likely to lose its AAA credit rating. This is a financial tool that the global banking cabal uses to punish countries that don't play along with the Western banking system. It is also why Russia and China have now been setting up their own credit rating agency that will rank countries and economies on a more fair and equitable structure than the easily manipulated Western system. Nathan MacDonald, writing for Sprott Money, suggested that the global elites have suffered a fatal blow following the vote, although this is still yet to be seen. MacDonald notes the following. Bought and paid for politicians around the world have engaged in a campaign of fear for months, including President Obama and Hillary Clinton. They have scolded those who wish to regain their independence and told them that they would be sent to the back of the queue if they were to leave the EU, crippling them economically. The likes of Nigel Farage and others from the Leave camp have fought for this day most of their political careers and have been scorned and ridiculed for doing so. Today, they are vindicated. Today, they are the victors. Meanwhile, the bureaucrats in Brussels, the unelected officials who have lorded over the UK, are scrambling to contain the panic among their supporters and within their ranks. The global elites know that this is a massive blow to their long-term plans. They know that this is just the beginning, and a tidal wave of nationalism and personal liberty is once again going to sweep across the globe. Those who cannot see this rising tide are either burying their heads in the sand or are asleep at the wheel. RT, in an interview with Max Kaiser of the Kaiser Report, reported that, according to Kaiser, all the pieces are in place for a systemic collapse greater than the financial crash of 2008 in the wake of Brexit. The Economist told RT that we are now faced with the possibility of a contagion, similar to the collapse of Lehman Brothers in 2008, which triggered a global credit crisis. We've seen markets sell off, and we've seen marking down of assets on books. We haven't yet seen the big margin selling that will come soon. I'm sure, said Kaiser, there will be some hedge funds that will declare bankruptcy. There are going to be some add-on effects that could start to gather some momentum. The question is, can the central banks once again ride to the rescue and save the global economy by printing money? Kaiser also noted the soaring of the Japanese yen after the vote result was known, saying that if the yen is rising, it shows that the game, which has been successful for 20 or 25 years, might be over. In which case, we're talking about a systemic collapse bigger than 2008, and it's right on time. Jim Willey, a financial writer and commentator with GoldenJackass.com, in excerpts taken from an interview with SilverDoctors.com, offered a few of his insights on what took place.
It is a big day, and it took me a little by surprise. I was expecting a bunch of fraud yesterday, but apparently the system was set up in Britain with thousands of volunteers to do hand counting of the ballots, and it made any attempts by machines, like the United States relies on for vote fraud, it made it very difficult. So now we're going to have all the scare tactics end. We're going to have the reality come into view. And it's just great to see the gold price up. It's up over $50, almost $55. The machines have to come in and register their rigged gold price. But I'm a little disappointed silver's not over 18 when it touched 18 back in April. So we got a little catch up to do with silver. It'll come in because it's absurdly out of balance. But anyway, back to some of the main points here. I think if I had to summarize in a single sentence what happened, I think the British were sick of seeing their sovereignty gone away and sick of the European fascist state. So they wanted to take control of their country, take control of important trade deals. I'm looking for a lot of Russian trade deals to come in. I'm looking for some financial platforms to be solidified by China in London. It's going to be really quite interesting. I think we're going to see a follow-on vote to render damage to the dollar and get rid of the fiat paper currency system. This move in gold, if it sticks above 1,300 in the next couple of days, we're going to get a resumption because of short covering. Those who are short on gold close to 1,300, expecting the Remain vote to prevail, they're hoping and praying that it comes back down. And if it does not in the next 24 hours, they're going to have to cover their shorts for a loss. And that's usually how the continuation takes a second gear. Going to be interesting, John. I mean, there's so much more. There's going to be, I think, a casualty real soon in Deutsche Bank. A colleague of mine just pointed out that they have $33 trillion in interest rate derivatives. This is Deutsche Bank. And $6.3 trillion worth of currency derivatives. We have a big move in the U.S. Treasury bond, down to 1.5% on the 10-year. We've got big moves all over the board in currencies. And there's one thing that derivatives cannot tolerate, and that's big moves. Then you're going to have a lot of pressure, I think, on other European Union member states to also exit. And it could be Netherlands, as you were saying before, but there's more. There's Denmark, there's Poland, there's Czech Republic, but Netherlands is big. They're a lot bigger than Poland for importance. But Poland is important for a military standpoint because it's a staging ground for the U.S. military in NATO. Look for some important new rebellion taking some momentum. And there's going to be a lot of criticism of the European commissioners. They've tried to ram down the throats of a lot of countries. The Ukraine war, the Russian sanctions, the Monsanto GMO foods, the Transatlantic Trade Investment Partnership Trade Union. None of the member states want any of them. So the dictatorship of Brussels could be forcing this string of referendum votes. I thought this British exit was a lot more than just Britain taking control of their country. It was a rejection of the fascist state that has arisen in Europe.
How did the elite let this happen? And do you think there's any chance that they're pulling the plug on the financial system and going to use Brexit as a scapegoat for, this is the reason why everything collapsed?
Well, they might, but how did they let it happen? I think an important event took place about a year ago when the Scots attempted to do an independence, and the referendum vote was rigged. And the observers noticed how they did the rigging, and therefore, I'm told by London Paul, there were tens of thousands of volunteers to hand count the vote. So what they did essentially was they just made impossible a rigged vote. The vote rigging could be good for maybe 5 or 6%. Even though we're seeing it's like 52% now for leave, I think without the rig it might have been closer to 60. Whatever it was on the vote fraud, it wasn't enough to overcome a huge advantage. And maybe the elite think that they could take advantage of this exit. I don't think they will, because they're going to see now the gold price go up. They're going to see the currencies in turmoil. They're going to see the bank derivatives upside down. But they also might, John, have been afraid that if they allowed a rig to take place and the Remain to prevail and win, the elites might have been afraid of pitchforks, because there's a lot of groundswell resistance and anger and angst, and a lot of people are angry. And I think they're angry at the trend of war and a fascist dictatorship. The food issue over GMO food labeling, it's very big in Europe. The Russian sanctions, probably bigger, maybe not bigger, but I think probably bigger. There's a lot of real strong resentment across all of Europe, including England. And this is a focal point. And it's good. It's good for the people to have their vote count. We're going to see some very weird things now. I think the British pound is going to get hit for a while, but it's going to rebound just like the Russian ruble did.
An article appearing on Zero Hedge on June 24th offers a bit of a warning that what was unfolding on Friday, the 24th, is only an appetizer for what may be to come on Monday, the 27th, suggesting that the markets will see even more activity. Tyler Durden, in his article, writes that Monday is where we're going to see a truer look at where the bodies are buried and a more accurate price discovery process than what we're seeing today. The question now is whether or not the global cabal really is in the state of panic or fear that the public would like to believe that they are. The whole idea of democracy, as it has been created, is to perpetuate the illusion that the people actually have the freedom to exercise their vote and have it mean something. Across the U.S., in Canada, and around Europe, and also in the global financial markets, truths are being made known about how systems can be rigged and manipulated to create the result that the global controllers want people to get, while letting them think that their voice was heard. The global cabal has always covered its bases, and thus this is why the markets were created to allow people to hedge their bets and investments on both positive and negative movements of the markets. MarketWatch reported on the 24th that George Soros may be getting rich on an implosion in the British markets. Again, the landmark vote in the UK to leave the European Union has rocked global markets, sending the British pound to its lowest level in more than 30 years. Futures for the Dow Jones Industrial Average were down 3.39%, as much as 700 points at one point, and Europe's benchmark stock index was down a little over 7% and was facing the worst one-day plunge since 1987. The article adds that it is precisely the scenario of which Soros, writing in Britain's Guardian newspaper last week, warned. The global financial carnage and Friday's tumble could be adding to the wealthy investors' bankroll if reports are true. Now, back in 2006, I predicted and told everyone at the University for Peace that there was going to be a global economic meltdown. I was expecting it to happen around 2008, and it did, but the global bankers managed to create more money to kick the can further down the road. Now, there is more information to validate this. First of all, let's get clear on something. The financial markets crashing are not tied to the outcome of the Brexit vote. If anything, it is merely the excuse that the global bankers have created so that they can blame others for the problems that they themselves created. With the fractional reserve model of fiat currency creation, it is mathematically impossible to get out of debt, and what we have just witnessed could be the final card that accelerates the collapse of this criminally fraudulent system. Greg Hunter of USAWatchdog.com offered a special Brexit update on the 24th and validates my prediction about the global economy and the markets not being tied to an outcome of a vote, especially a vote that was reported earlier as not being legally binding.
Mainstream media wants to tell you the reason why this happened is because the Brits decided to leave, the European Union. No. That's not the real reason why this happened. Because otherwise, the entire global stock markets and economies wouldn't crash all at the same time. And the reason why this happened is because all the global economies are up to their necks in sovereign debt and debt that they're never going to pay off. Since 2008, as a planet, we increased the debt of the world by about the global GDP, about $65-70 trillion. Now, this is what we had in 2008 was a debt problem. We had a subprime debt problem. And how we fixed it as a planet is we basically added 65-70, we added more debt. That's like somebody on the verge of bankruptcy, and 6 or 7 banks say, hey, here's a $100,000 credit card. You can charge up, all you want and charge $100,000 per card. All of a sudden, you have $700,000-800,000. But you don't have to be bankrupt. You can put that off for a while. That's exactly what the brainiacs at the World Trust, who don't want to take bankruptcy, who don't want to take a hit, who don't want to write anything off. They want to transfer this debt onto the sovereign bonds, onto the people. And at least 53% of Brits had the good sense to get out of this. Now, will they get out of it? It's going to be a 2-year negotiation. It's an advisory vote. Listen, this whole problem comes down to one thing. Too much debt. And nobody wants to write it off. That's the problem. Rich people don't want to take a hit. Rich people don't want to be put in bankruptcy, receivership. That's what it should have happened in 2008 if you wanted to fix this. But they didn't want to fix it. They didn't want to take a hit. Bank of America should have been taken to receivership. J.P. Morgan should have been taken to receivership. Wells Fargo should have been taken to receivership. These banks should have been taken to receivership, reorganized, and all those bank heads should have been fired. They have still not prosecuted a single top banker and put them in jail. Not a single one. This centers around fraud, crime, elites, and they want you, global taxpayers, the people of the world, to take a hit. This was not about the voting to get out. This was about the necrotic, dying, over-indebted, bloated European Union, and that union is never paying off their debt, and nobody else around the world is ever paying off this debt. Thus, this is the reason why China has been hoarding gold for years, and my sources say they have a lot more than the few thousand tons that they say they have. You know, the overarching trend for the stock market is down. Forget what the CNBC people tell you. I've been telling you for I don't know how long we're not in a recovery. Folks, are we in a recovery? Is this a recovery? Also, the overarching trend for gold and silver is going to go up. And as Nick Barashef from Bullion Management Group says, I don't think it'll stair-step up. I think it'll just vault up. It'll just reprice someday. This is not going to get better, folks. Finally, this is reality meeting the fantasy that this could go on forever and central banks could prop this up forever. They cannot, and they will not. Prepare yourself mentally, physically, and above all, spiritually. Fear not, and prepare yourself.
Back in May, it had been reported in a London Telegraph article by Christopher Hope and Peter Foster that the campaign to keep Britain in Europe is being part funded with hundreds of thousands of pounds by foreign companies and some of America's biggest banks. It has emerged. Figures from the Electoral Commission show that Citigroup and Morgan Stanley donated £250,000 each to the official Britain Stronger in Europe group ahead of the referendum on Britain's membership in the EU. Two other U.S. banks, Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan, donated £500,000 each to the Britain Stronger in Europe campaign before February, when donations had to be declared. Other donations came from France's Airbus and Eurostar, which gave £7,500 each. Although the Leave campaign took in more donations, in a way that could be loosely compared to how Bernie Sanders got all his money from the more private and grassroots sector, the Remain campaign took in less, but consisted of several banking groups and financial interests. Is this the TKO, or technical knockout punch, that so many of us have been waiting for? Certainly, we can focus on the creation that it will indeed be the very visible and very public end to what many have been attempting to share quietly and without public proof for so many years. While much of the Western financial world reels either in genuine panic or pretend panic to scare the masses, it seems as though Russia, China, the BRICS alliance, and other countries not attached to the Western system are quietly going about their own business as though the unfolding dramas are not particularly relevant to them. Recently, St. Petersburg in Russia played host to the 2016 International Economic Forum, held on the 16th to the 18th of June. The program outline page on the official website listed the various presentations, some of which were as follows: Realizing the Economic Potential of Russia, Russian Macroeconomic Policy in Response to a Volatile Global Environment. Inclusive Growth, How Best to Address Income Disparity Without Stifling Growth. Social Entrepreneurship as an Agent for Social Change. Russia-Latin American SMEs as Catalysts in Building Value. The Geoeconomics of Large-Scale Infrastructure Projects. Russia-United Kingdom, Targeting Improved Trade and Economic Relations for a 100-year Partnership. BRICS Business Forum, Joining Forces to Achieve Stable Economic Growth. Russia and the EU, What Follows the Strategic Partnership That Never Happened. And numerous other topics of interest in these current times. An RT article on June 18th reported that over 12,000 people from 130 countries took part in the forum, according to Anton Kobiakov, the executive secretary of the forum's organizing committee. All in all, 30 ministers from 21 countries took part in the SPIEF, he said, adding that representatives of at least 1,300 companies were in attendance, 880 of which were CEOs. At least 332 official agreements worth more than $15.4 billion have been signed at the forum so far, not including unofficial deals, Kobiakov added. For a country that the Western media would like the people of the world to believe is bad, it seems that there are many corporations and governments that seem to think otherwise and are eager to cooperate with Russia. The article also reported Russia and Iran as having benefited from many deals. Between Italy and Russia alone, over 1 billion euros worth of deals had been signed. Russian President Putin also hinted at the forum that Russia may be willing to unilaterally lift some of its counter-sanctions on EU countries as a gesture of good faith, but stressed that there would have to be an appropriate counter-response by EU countries. According to RT, one of the most innovative ideas discussed at the forum was an idea from Russia's Ministry of Transport to use Hyperloop technology along a 70-kilometer corridor of Russia's first super high-speed transport system. Russia's Minister of Transport, Maxim Sokolov, said he was also seeking to get Chinese investors involved in funding the project. In a strong hint to the new Silk Road vision that is being established with China, the Shanghai Cooperative Organization and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations for a Eurasian transportation and trading corridor, Putin stated that Russian and Asian countries should create a vast economic space. Russia appears to be recognizing the value of humanity as well. A Sputnik news article on the forum reported the following. Russia may replace its reliance on commodities and mineral resources with human capital, the World Economic Forum's managing board member told Sputnik on the 18th. Mirat Sonmez, a World Economic Forum board member, noted the success of Russia's strong math-oriented education system, but also noted that Russia is currently 41st worldwide in people's connectivity through the Internet. Sonmez said that the question is what should the policymakers and we as a society focus on? The focus has been on commodities so far, on oil and minerals, but the most important commodity is the human talent. The question is what we do with it. We need to take a step back and think in this new era of superconnectivity, machine learning, and biology developments. How do we train our people to be innovative and creative? Education is key. Traditional education models will not work anymore. The key challenge for every country is how talents are nurtured and kept in the country. Loosely speaking, he is hinting that every country has the potential to make itself self-sustaining without being reliant on cabal-controlled multinational corporations that are seeking to take over countries on all levels. Sputnik also reported on the presence of several people that suggested a softening position of the EU where Russia is concerned. Sputnik also reported that several high-ranking officials, most notably European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker and Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, have participated in SPIEF for the first time since the introduction of anti-Russian sanctions in 2014 and before their anticipated revision, which is expected to prompt a reset in EU-Russia relations. On June 28th to 29th, the EU leaders are set to decide on the further prolongation of the sanctions at a summit in Brussels. So, the Western media continues to play its games, trying to hide the fact that other countries around the world are beginning to call the bluff of the global banking cabal and its controllers. They move forward without devoting much attention and resources to the dying Western economic paradigm because they know that its days are numbered. In general news, it seems that comedians are starting to get much bolder in their comments when speaking to politicians and bureaucrats. Earlier this year at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, Larry Wilmore was given a bit of a cool reception for his comments on the media and the political establishment. Recently, at the Radio TV Correspondents Association dinner, another comedian, Hassan Minhaj, pulled a surprise on the crowd, and after some pretty strong comedic comments, he suddenly turned very serious to finish up his address to the crowd by ripping into U.S. congressional members over gun control. The audio clip starts at the end of one joke to capture his transition to something very serious.
I love that all morning they're just like, Mexicans, all lives matter, Arabs, 1201, shawarma time. I love that so much. I don't even know how to pivot here, to be honest with you guys. You know, what we saw in Orlando was one of the ugliest cocktails of the problems that we still see here in America. A cocktail of homophobia, xenophobia, lack of access to mental health care, and sheer lack of political will. And all of us satirists, we've all been yelling out, crying out for change. But the sad reality is that we are all complicit in what happened. Every day in our workplaces, in our homes, in our religious institutions, there is covert or overt discrimination or phobia towards people of different religious, racial, or sexual walks of life. And we just sit there and we let it happen because it doesn't affect our bottom line. Oh, I didn't say it, Hassan. I don't think it's that way. They said it, okay? It's not that simple, Hassan. And we just go on with our lives because it didn't affect our status quo. And the sad reality is stuff like this is going to continue to happen unless we recognize that civil liberties are an all or nothing game. A rising tide lifts all boats. It's not pick or choose. So whether you like it or not, we all have to step up and fight for each other. Otherwise, the whole thing is a sham. And until we do that, hijabis are going to get harassed in the streets. Members from the trans community are going to be demonized for using the bathroom. And my brothers and sisters in the African American community, their spines are going to continue to get shattered in the back of paddy wagons until we stand up and say something. And the thing that hurts me the most is, I wish I would have done more. To my brothers and sisters in the LGBTQ community and every marginalized community, I'm sorry I didn't do more. And the same goes for Congress. You know, we look to you guys as our leaders. You make almost $200,000 a year to write rules to make our society better. Not tweet, not tell us about your thoughts and prayers, to write rules to make our society better. And ultimately it comes down to money and influence. And right now, since 1998, the NRA has given $3.7 million to Congress. There are 294 sitting members of Congress that have accepted contributions from the NRA, and that doesn't even include the millions of dollars from outside lobbying. So before I get up here in my liberal bubble and I ask for gun control and universal background checks and banning assault rifles, we got to be able to have the conversation. And right now, specifically Congress, has blocked legislation for the CDC to study gun-related violence. We can't even talk about the issue with real statistics and facts. So I don't know if this is like a Kickstarter thing, but if $3.7 million can buy political influence to take lives, if we raise $4 million, would you guys take that to save lives? I don't know. Ultimately, I just got to ask you this. Look, when I got into comedy, when you guys got into media, and when you guys got into politics, we wanted to do the best work we could possibly do. And is this what you want your legacy to be? That you were could have done something Congress, but you didn't because of outside lobbying? That you were complicit in the deaths of thousands of Americans? And look, I know being a member of Congress is hard. You got to placate your base. You got to look out for re-election. You got to answer to lobbyists. But please persevere, because our thoughts and prayers are with you. Good night.
It seems the politicians are finally being put on notice that the people are starting to pay attention. And if they really have any hope of getting re-elected in the future, they are going to have to actually start listening to their constituents and begin representing their interests, or they will find themselves very quickly without a job. The full speech given by Minaj will be included in the show summary for this story. In disclosure-related news, longtime listeners will recall the citizens' hearings on disclosure held in 2013 and sponsored by the Paradigm Research Group and its founder and executive director, Stephen Bassett. On Saturday, June 25th, Canada will be having a mini version of the hearings, although politicians are not expected to be hearing the issue in any formal way. The Alien Cosmic Expo is taking place from June 24th to the 26th in the city of Brantford, Ontario, the same city where the Grand River Mohawks have been challenging the corporate entity governments to reclaim their rights, their lands, their stolen funds, and their freedom. According to the website aliencosmicexpo.com, the first night, the 24th, would focus on the true story of Travis Walton and his experiences as an abductee. On Saturday the 25th, an informal hearing on the issue of disclosure will take place. Regarding this event, the website writes that never before in Canadian history has there ever been an open public examination and investigation of the truth behind the UFO reality. On Saturday, June 25th in Brantford, Ontario, this will change with Canada's first public hearing on UFOs. A hearing on ET disclosure will not only be a comprehensive public examination of the reality of the UFO phenomenon, but it will reveal how the former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada and Minister of National Defence, the Honourable Paul Hellyer, and 6 of the world's foremost experts on unidentified flying objects plan to expose and bring to an end a decades-long governmental cover-up. The hearing represents an event of importance to Canadians, according to the website, because the hearing's research and development team has received specific documentation from NORAD that Canadian CF-18 jets have chased and have intercepted these unknown craft in Canadian airspace. This NORAD document specifically states that a yearly average of 1,800 unknowns have been tracked by NORAD over the 5 years. In the same document, NORAD also reports that a yearly average of 75 intercepts were made over the last 5 years. What has NORAD been tracking? What have they been intercepting? To date, the U.S. and Canadian governments disavow any knowledge of these events. Canadians and the world need answers. Canadians need to know what is happening in our skies. A hearing on ET disclosure will reveal how and why government, military, and intelligence agencies at the highest levels of governance on the planet have known about, discussed, analyzed, and sequestered information on the UFO phenomenon for over 65 years. One of the speakers at the event, Paradigm Research Group founder and executive director Stephen Bassett, said back in 2013 that in a constitutional democracy, government has always been given the right to keep secrets, but government has never been given the right to lie to the people. Participating in the hearing will be 8 other well-known and influential names within the disclosure movement. Participating along with Bassett in Saturday's disclosure hearing will be notable names such as Stanton Friedman, Nick Pope from the UK, Victor Vigiani, Travis Walton, Bob Mitchell, Grant Cameron, Richard Dolan, and former Canadian politician and Minister of Defence Paul Hellyer, who is arguably still the highest-ranking G8 politician to come out in support of the existence of our galactic families. On Sunday, June 26th, the day will be filled with numerous other speakers on subjects relating to the paranormal and extraterrestrials. Relative to the issue of Hillary Clinton and disclosure as it relates to the U.S. election, Canadian UFO researcher Grant Cameron is one of the foremost authorities on Hillary and Bill Clinton and their UFO connection. Much of his research can be found at his website, presidentialufo.com, and the link will be in the show summary. As well, Cameron has just published the Clinton UFO storybook, ET Politics in the White House. It includes, of course, an extended narrative of the Rockefeller Initiative from 1993 to 96. The coincidence should not be overlooked as to the timing of this release just ahead of the Democratic Convention in July and the presumptive election later this year. Clinton campaign manager and even Clinton herself have dropped both subtle and not so subtle hints relating to the issue of disclosure. In a monthly update for June from the Paradigm Research Group, Bassett has written the following. John Podesta's strategy is to put out a number of somewhat vague statements that demonstrate the Clinton campaign considers the ET issue to be a serious matter. This is to protect his candidate should the media finally bite down hard on the issue. But these statements are carefully crafted to avoid igniting a media frenzy. However, if the political media choose to stay behind the truth embargo rope line, particularly the network news operations, he is prepared to coast all the way to the White House without saying anything more. Thus, his silence since June the 2nd. But this is just the lull before the storm. The print media are not contained. Reporters are continuing to put questions to the Clinton campaign and directly to Podesta and getting no response. More articles are on the way. One or more television news venues could make a move at any time. The journalistic equation under consideration is whether the convention delegates, particularly the superdelegates, should be informed of the full story behind the Clinton E.T. Rockefeller Initiative connection before the convention nominating vote. Meanwhile, a plethora of negative developments are stirring around Clinton's candidacy. Time is running out for Podesta's dual strategy. The very nature of candidate Clinton's chief flaws requires her to speak truth to power on the ET issue. The storm is coming, and taking shelter behind a wall of no comments will no longer be an option. In light of how quickly other geopolitical events are unfolding, could a disclosure message be worked into the distraction of everything else? Keep your eyes wide open, follow the money, and always look for the story behind the distraction. Finally, in health-related news, we take a look at two stories relating to death, or perhaps more appropriately, the transition to the life after life. We humans, especially those of us in the Western world, sure do eat up all the fear and propaganda that is fed to us, don't we? I, like many of you, would probably immediately say, no, I don't believe the propaganda, or at least the information I recognize as propaganda. Others will go on the defensive and ask, what propaganda? You are just a conspiracy theorist nutcase. Each individual has his or her equally valid reasons for having the beliefs that she or he has in the current moment of now. And the more awake and aware people will recognize and honor this, and perhaps send a prayer or blessing to that individual to help her or him awaken at the appropriate time, and in a way that is as meaningful, as comfortable, and as safe for that individual, for his or her highest good in that moment. Life, as we currently know it, is life, in 3D form, and it is no secret to those who observe the various paradoxes about what we are told and what is put into actual practice in our world. Religion has taught that there is a God that loves us, and yet groups all over the world use this same God in their defense of killing and punishing others who do not see God the way this particular group or individual sees God. Humans have been led to believe that we are to be loving and kind to all, and this has been through the fear of an imaginary hell that was created to scare people into accepting authority of whatever church is selling the message. We have been told that we are to cherish this life and work hard to make others rich. At the same time, those wealthy people contribute to polluted skies and waters, dangerous chemicals in our foods, drinks, medicines, and vaccines. At the same time, those who claim to be representing the people are blindly sending middle and lower class children off to die and kill others in wars with people that we, the general public, have no conflict with. It is only the wealthy bankers and power brokers who create the conflicts for their profit, power, and unending greed. We are told that although the divine creator is all-loving, we should try to stay in this world as long as possible so we can continue to be good sheep and taxpayers to the wealthy elitists, even if our health is not very good. Yet, When it comes to making the choice to leave this world, the same government that sends poorer young people off to die on behalf of wealthy power controllers also claims to know what is best in denying someone the choice to exit this world if one feels that one's health is no longer worth the struggle to stay. An article on RT.com on June 18th has reported that Canada has adopted a law permitting assisted suicide for terminally ill adults whose death is reasonably foreseeable. Some critics say the law prevents those with degenerative conditions, such as Alzheimer's, from seeking medically assisted death. The law was originally proposed after Canada's Supreme Court overturned a ban on doctor-assisted suicide in 2015. The court's decision extended to adults suffering from intolerable physical or psychological pain and untreatable medical conditions. The Canadian Senate approved the government bill C-14 on June 18th in a vote of 44 to 28. The article notes that critics, including politicians, patients, and human rights activists, have been up in arms over the new restrictive law, which allows the luxury of assisted dying exclusively to adults suffering from an incurable disease or disability in an advanced stage of irreversible decline. The biggest question is, can this bill, as is written right now, actually protect somebody who is either depressed, having mental illness issues, or is incompetent? Executive Director of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, Alex Scheidenberg, told LifeSite News. And the answer is no. Medically assisted suicide, also known by its more positive name, euthanasia, is allowed in several countries such as Switzerland, Colombia, Albania, Japan, and the Netherlands. It is also allowed in some U.S. states, Vermont, Montana, New Mexico, Oregon, Washington, and California. The RT article closed with the following. Medical assistance in dying is a difficult, complex, and deeply personal issue, Canada's Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould and Health Minister Jane Philpott acknowledged in a joint statement, adding that the legislation succeeded in striking the right balance between personal autonomy for those seeking access to medically assisted dying and protecting the vulnerable. Without even realizing it, they both affirmed the very reason why government should not even be involved in the decision at all. The only reason a government wants to be involved is because each citizen has been turned into a corporate entity, and thus the corporation wants to know when one of its entities will no longer be around to pay taxes. Families begin to fight over the issue, first for the reason that they may be selfish in wanting to keep someone around who no longer desires to be around, or secondly, because in allowing a family member to exit this way, there may likely be no insurance money to claim. The choice to leave this physical world is not a corporate commercial contract to be negotiated. It is, as the Canadian ministers declared, a personal issue. It is only complex when the government tries to stick its neck into private issues that they have no business interfering with, especially if this same government is willing to commit murder of young people defending the rights of the wealthy to continue exploiting humanity and the planet. On top of all the questions and rules that the government forces upon a family attempting to grieve for a loved one who has now transitioned, the government even has rules for determining how one can be buried. It has taken a number of years for various green solutions to come more into mainstream consciousness because the death industry wanted to try to profit as much as possible on the commercialization of death and the amount of money spent on honoring one who is no longer with us as the quote-unquote kind and loving thing to do. An article appearing on the CBC website, news website on June 20th has reported on another green solution to consider for those who are looking for alternatives for celebrating the life of their transitioned loved one. As always, where government officials and bureaucrats are involved, they always have to make things more complicated when they do not understand something. According to the article, Waterworks officials in a small town southwest of Canada's capital city, Ottawa, are monitoring a funeral company that has become the first in Ontario to use an alkaline solution to dissolve human remains and then drain the leftover coffee-colored effluents into the sewer system. Aqua Green Dispositions began operating in a rental unit within the former Rideau Regional Centre in Smiths Falls in May of 2015 after receiving a license from the Ontario government. Hilton's Unforgettable Tales, a parallel business handling the remains of pets, had been using the same process for a couple of years prior to Aqua Green Dispositions, but it took longer to get a license to handle human remains. Well, why? Think about it. The story was written in such a way so as to address the more negative and fearful aspect of the story first, without positioning the service as a cleaner, potentially safer, and more environmentally friendly way, assuming one still looks to pursue commercialized forms of burials according to commercial rules. The process is called alkaline hydrolysis and offers a viable cremation alternative to the flame-based cremation process. According to David Hilton, owner of the Smiths Falls Funeral Home utilizing the service, it brings your body back to its natural state. It's the same way as being buried in the ground, but instead of taking 15 or 20 years to disintegrate, it does it in a much quicker process. And it's all environmentally friendly. The article continues, the computerized Aqua Green Dispositions system takes less than 2 hours to dissolve all organic material. Once the cycle is complete, the caustic fluid from the pressure vessel passes through 2 filters and on to the municipal sewer system, leaving only the skeleton behind. Those bones, soft and wet from the alkaline hydrolysis process, are then dried in a convection oven, pressed into a fine white powder, and finally returned to the loved one's family to be scattered. The total weight of the powdered calcium phosphate matter that is returned, Hilton said, is between 3 and 5 kilograms. It's 100% green, said Hilton, who has completed nearly 200 flame-free cremations since opening last year, with business growing each month. As it is currently, flame-based cremations can take between 3 to 4 hours and can release as much as 250 kilograms of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The process, according to the website, uses 85% less energy than a traditional cremation. The new, or relatively new process, by comparison, uses potash, water, and salt to break down the body in a heated tube, similar to an MRI or a CAT scan machine in a hospital. Benefits include not having to burn the wooden casket, as well as with alkaline hydrolysis, mercury from dental fillings are not released and any medical implants or technologies are not harmed, which means that they could, in theory, be removed and recycled or donated to programs overseas. There will no doubt be people who, upon hearing this story, will immediately begin to criticize the process because human remains are being washed away into a local sewer system, thinking that it may somehow pollute the water. Ted Joint, the town employee responsible for the operations of the water treatment facility, monitored the water levels for almost a year and has reported that water cleanliness levels were no different after the introduction of the new process. Various links to the information about Aqua Green Dispositions will appear in the show summary, and people may be able to investigate whether similar options are available in Europe, Asia, or Australia, New Zealand. Many of you are cringing knowing what's about to come, so I don't want to disappoint you. Wait for it. Wait for it. Environmentally friendly people will no doubt be dying to get into this or some similarly green process. I know. Don't give up my day job. In this week's final words, let's talk about this issue of democracy and the illusion of freedom that seems to be present within the Western world for a little bit here. The people of the UK have now voted to separate from the EU. History has long shown how members of the global cabal play and profit from both sides of a war. What is perhaps surprising is that the global controllers were not able to rig the voting system enough to give them the vote that they wanted, unless this was the vote that they did want. Please try to keep in mind this one point. The global cabal profits the more there is war, chaos, fear, and separation. The stock markets have been rigged in ways so that even when people think they have won, they might still lose. If you have ever gambled on a roulette table, you might know that you have various options to choose. You can choose a specific number and color, and the winnings will be much higher. You can take a lesser bet, for example, all odd numbers, or all even numbers. You can choose all numbers that are red, or all numbers that are black. You can choose a range of numbers, and so on. In the stock market, it is possible to bet on the market going up or bet on the market going down. You can be sure that the wealthy elitists who are playing both sides to ensure that they do not lose one way or the other. The market collapse is very likely tied to two things. The first would be the uninformed investors who panic and dump out of the markets, often losing a fair bit in the process. The second are the highly informed investors who understand market collapses and trends and may lose in some areas temporarily while buying up all the stocks that were dumped at a much lower price, and they believe that they will recover when the cycle reverses. It is my theory that those rigging the markets are allowing this market collapse to instill a sense of fear into people to make them regret voting to leave. As we heard earlier, this may now not be the case. It will also breed a lot of anger and resentment among those who lost money, because then they will blame those who voted to leave instead of blaming those who orchestrated the whole charade in the process. In this way, the global controllers get to sit back and laugh as they watch the uninformed sheep blaming and fighting amongst each other. They do not need to take action against the sheep, when the sheep are quite happy to take action against themselves in their defense of what each individual happens to believe is a free democracy. The world is being allowed to believe that the will of the people has spoken in the UK. It is very important to remember what happened in Greece. The people of Greece were allowed the same illusion that their voice could elect the Syriza party, a party committed, at least originally, to standing up to the global bankers and EU controllers. What the people of Greece ultimately found out, however, was just how strong and powerful this unelected group of power brokers could be on a government that is supposedly to represent the will of the people. In the case of Greece, the government was forced to surrender to the orders of EU controllers, and this has got the people fighting angry in Greece. In the UK, a country with a stronger international economy, the people are now likely going to be punished in a different way. The people will have to be very vigilant now, because what I think might happen will be this. The global controllers will now attempt to sell a message that there will have to be a long and extended negotiation in order for the separation to proceed smoothly. To put it very simply, it is this. Big-time lawyers are going to get extremely rich, and there are going to be kickbacks and payoffs to ensure that the process is drawn out as long as possible so that taxpayers can be punished for daring to turn against the desires of their handlers. This is just one part of the criminally fraudulent nature of the system of commercial law. Although it is ultimately good that the will of the people won in the vote, whether or not the people really win will be dependent upon how well informed they become as to the nature of the punishments that will be attempted upon them without their informed or democratic consent. As the quote by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe goes, "None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe that they are free." CVN has in the past attempted to inform listeners about the difference between representative democracy and proportional representative democracy. A representative democracy is a system that potentially allows a party that does not have the majority support of the people of a country to have a majority government. Canada has been a prime example of this over the years. The former leadership of Stephen Harper was able to secure a majority status within Parliament, even though the party had only received less than 30% of the popular vote. In this system, it is possible that a party could get 20% of the vote in every constituency across the country and yet still have no one sitting in the Parliament. A proportional representative democracy is a system that allocates seats in a Parliament according to the overall votes across the country. In this system, the same party that had 20% support in every constituency but no representation previously would be offered a certain number of seats based on the total number of people who supported that party as a percentage of the total number of people who voted in the election. Most, if not all, Western democracies are representative and not proportional. In Canada, for example, a majority government with less than 50% support of the people can pass commercial legislation that was never even offered to the people for their informed and democratic consent. Yet, Canadians, Americans, and those in all Western countries will stand up and defend that their country is free, and some may even forcefully defend that position, as if the individual truly knows what it is that he or she is defending. People of Canada, the US, the UK, and basically of all Western countries, at least, are under the mass illusion and delusion that they live in freedom. Case and point. One cannot build a house without permission from the government. One cannot eat food without permission from the government. One cannot drive a car without permission from the government. One cannot own a gun without permission from the government. You can't go fishing without permission from the government. You can't get married without permission from the government. One can't work without permission from the government. One cannot leave the country without permission from the government. One cannot start a business without permission from the government. One cannot fly on a commercial plane without permission from the government. One cannot get a bank loan without permission from the government. One cannot take drugs without permission from the government. Shall I continue? A government can impose taxes without seeking informed consent. A government can spend money wastefully on research and impact studies and legal work for lower priority projects without informed consent. A government can send middle and lower class children to kill, harm, or be harmed or killed in unlawful wars started by bankers. A government can legalize and enforce dangerous foods, water, air chemicals, and vaccines without informed consent. Governments and unlawful law enforcement agents and agencies can impose a criminally fraudulent system of commercial law upon people and arrest any who question it without informed consent. Banks can fraudulently create money out of thin air, risking nothing, while claiming a right to foreclose when people cannot pay, without informed consent. As we heard in the health story moments ago, one cannot even choose to die without permission from the government. The irony is that the government is comprised of people elected by those very same people living under the illusion and delusion of freedom. Yet, the government, again elected by the people, continues to pass commercial legislation without the informed and democratic consent of the people. Poverty is more than just a symptom of a fraudulent banking system that exists on debt that is mathematically impossible to repay. It is an intentionally created tool for the purposes of keeping people in debt, in fear, in separation, and therefore under control. Democracy is merely the illusion that allows one to believe that one has the power in so-called freedom, and yet it is also the very same tool by which one gives one's uninformed consent to being a slave to commercial rules given the force of law. Create a wonderful week until our next moment of now. So that is the sample of the unfolding higher consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is broadcast weekly from the CosmicVisionNews.com website. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary available on the blog on the website. CVN can be followed through the CVN Facebook page, YouTube channel, as well as on Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that if you think going to a job every day is hard work, just wait until you actually try waking people up. Until our next moment of now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your hearts, and keep your eyes to the skies. Disclosure is unfolding all around you. Namaste.